Hello, my name's Nicola Askham. I'm known as the Data Governance Coach, and I've made it my mission to help as many people as possible be successful with data governance. So I was really flattered to be part of this summit to spread the data governance message further. So I've been doing data governance for 17 years now, and I think it's fair to say that in the early days I was a bit of an evangelist. That's a word that I really hate to use now, but in the early days I wanted to do everything, and I wanted to govern all data perfectly. Now, I worked for a bank at the time, so you can imagine how much data they had, and that didn't go down very well. Me standing at the top of an ivory tower preaching and telling people that all data had to be governed and it had to be perfect really got me nowhere. So I've learned over the years that you have to be very pragmatic and practical when you're doing data governance. Not only can you not do data governance over everything, I've learned through experience that it's just not useful to, as not all data is the same value to your organization. So we need to consider carefully where we put our data governance focus, and now more so than ever before. So it got me thinking, I wonder if there's any further I can go in becoming more pragmatic. Because what we're facing now is that demand for data governance is increasing as a result of coronavirus. There's more and more focus on data because people want the confidence that they have the right data and it's good enough quality to make decisions so that they make decisions for their business that hopefully will enable them to survive these times. But at the same time that demands are going up, budgets seem to be cut. People are not spending money on data governance, but they want more of it. So we've got this conundrum. If we're going to deliver data governance, it has to deliver some benefits. There's no point doing it just for the fun of it. So if you've got to deliver benefits, how are you going to do that if you've got little or no budget? What we're facing now more than ever before is the requirement to deliver data governance on a shoestring. Now, being a bit of a data governance geek, I do love a definition. So I thought we'd better have a definition of shoestring. And this is what I found. It's a small or inadequate budget. And I think that probably sums up what I was saying on the previous slide. It's what people want us to do right now. We're facing a situation where being asked to deliver benefits on an inadequate budget. So the question I asked myself is, what can we really do that's useful on that basis? Because if we put in place something called data governance now that isn't well received or doesn't deliver any value or isn't going to be scalable in the future, then we've wasted whatever time and resources we do have now. But not only that, we've made it harder to do a subsequent attempt of data governance in the future. Now, this is something I've come across so many times. If your first attempt at data governance is done poorly, your subsequent attempt are going to be harder and even more challenging to do successfully. So if we're going to take a minimal approach, we need to make sure that we do something useful, that it won't make it harder for us to do things properly in the future. So we've got to work out how pragmatic we can be, still deliver some results, and sets us up well for the future. No big challenge there. So let's have a look at another definition. When I heard the term being used, I really liked the sound of data governance on the shoestring, because it just sums up what a lot of us are facing at the moment. And I hope you'll agree with me that this is a good definition, a minimum approach to proactively managing data quality. But then you come to the example and I started thinking, now, how many of you would be happy to speak at an event like this and say, oh yes, my company implemented data governance on a shoestring? Doesn't sound like something to be proud of, does it? It sounds like you've probably done it cheaply or not properly. So I thought, well, perhaps this isn't going to be a good title for the approach after all. So I had a little bit of a tweak with the title and came up with the title that we've used for this session, Minimal Data Governance. And you can see I haven't actually changed the definition at all. But what I have changed is the example. And I'm hoping that you would be happy to say, my company implemented minimal data governance initially. That makes it sound like, you're saying we took a sensible, practical approach initially because the circumstances required it, but it was only the start of something bigger and better. I think it's absolutely vital to choose your words with care when you're doing data governance, when you're communicating about it, which is why I've been trying to demonstrate with these last few slides. And if you say you're going to do data governance on a shoestring, you're just not going to be taken seriously. It doesn't give the right impressions. But if you say minimal data governance, I think it does give the impression that perhaps this is something that isn't going to be too much hard work, but it is going to be worth doing, and perhaps we can manage to do it. And it also gives the idea that this is just the start and more will follow. But what does that really mean in practice? Well, these are the kind of things that I've heard in conversations many times over the years. People say things like, can we do just enough data governance to say we're doing it? That really doesn't sound like the right approach, is it? Or, can we do just enough to keep the regulator off our back? I can't tell you how many times I've been asked that. And finally, can we just do something that's not going to take too much effort? Now, I have to be honest, if you're thinking in any of those kind of ways, you're in totally the wrong frame of mind, and you're not going to deliver anything of any value. And as I've already said, that's going to make it even harder to do data governance in the future. Now, hopefully you've gathered by now, I don't do slides with lots of words on them, but these words I thought were important enough to make them big and put them right in the middle of the slide. Minimal data governance has to deliver real value. If it doesn't, there's absolutely no point doing it. This is all about delivering on value. Now, that's really easy for somebody like me to say, and you're probably listening thinking, well, that's great, Nicola, but how am I going to go about doing it? Now, I'm sure many of you have come across Simon Sinek. If you haven't heard of him, you don't have to go and buy his book, although I do recommend it. But he did a TED Talk a few years ago, which is absolutely fabulous. And I would encourage you to go and spend 15 minutes or so watching that. Simon Sinek was originally a marketing executive and did lots of analysis on why the most successful marketing campaigns were so successful. And he came to the conclusion that the ones that were really successful started with why you needed the product and not what it was. Now, we need to take this exact approach with data governance. Most people start with the what of data governance. And to be fair, I did as well for the first few years of doing it. So I'm as guilty as everyone else. You meet a senior stakeholder and you say, we're going to do data governance and this is what it is. Now, I'm quite passionate about data governance, but let's face it, it doesn't sound the most exciting job title. And if you focus on explaining what it is, very few people are going to get excited. However, in my experience, if you start with why you're doing it, people are interested in and start asking how you're going to deliver that. So the approach that Simon Sinek recommends is really important for lots of things, but it's absolutely vital for data governance. So I'd encourage you, whether you're doing minimal data governance or the full thing, work out why your data governance should be doing it. And once you've worked out that, you can start looking at the benefits you hope to deliver. Now, the benefits that you deliver are going to be unique to your organisation, but I thought we could have a quick look at the typical benefits that I have seen realised over the years. You've got things like improved efficiency and reduced costs that come through mistakes not being made. Accurate reporting. Generally people don't make the wrong decisions deliberately, but they're quite frequently given reports that contain the wrong data or poor quality data, and they make their bad decisions based on that. Perhaps you want your main benefit to be facilitating compliance with some regulation that you have to comply with. Or perhaps you need to protect your reputation with customers and suppliers. The next benefit is all about supporting your strategy, and I'm talking corporate strategy here. If you have a data strategy, that's great, but it needs to be aligned to your corporate strategy anyway. This is all about helping your organization deliver your corporate strategy, and having data governance in place enables that. And finally, perhaps you want a single version of the truth. Perhaps that's a single customer view or a single supplier view, but you can't do master data management successfully without data governance. So there's quite a few benefits, and not all of them are going to apply to you and your organization. And to be fair, you might think of others, because as I said earlier, successful data governance is going to be unique to each organization, and I wouldn't expect every organization to achieve the same benefits. So having identified which are the benefits that are going to be the key ones for your organization, it's time to go and manage expectations with your senior stakeholders. Now, I've been doing data governance for 17 years, and if you went back 5 years or so, most people still hadn't heard of data governance. I had to go and explain everything from scratch. But these days, when you go and talk to a senior stakeholder, they're likely to have heard of data governance, and even worse, they've probably heard it can do wonderful things. Now, if we're going to take a minimal approach, we're going to have to manage those expectations, because we just can't do everything. So Having identified why we're going to do data governance and which benefits we're going to focus on achieving initially, we need to talk to them and explain to them why we're going to have to do a very focused delivery. And I also think we need to manage their expectations on the length of time it's going to take. Data governance takes a long time, and I'm afraid the bad news is that minimal data governance also takes a long time. I just can't see how you can get any value from it by trying to do it quickly, because you won't do it properly, and therefore you just won't get any value. And I mentioned it before, you get it wrong the first time, you're going to make it harder for the future. So, let's be really clear and make sure our stakeholders understand what's involved at this stage. You're going to need to use these conversations to get them to focus on and agree the benefits that you're going to focus on delivering. You might have been nodding your head to all of the benefits when we covered them a minute ago, but you can't deliver all of them at the same time if you're taking a minimal data governance approach. So I'd recommend that you identify one priority benefit to focus on. And if you put in place data governance to deliver that correctly, some of the other benefits are going to start coming through anyway. And then you're going to be in a good position to start delivering more of them. Now you've done that, you're going to have to define your scope. We know why we're going to do data governance. We know what benefits we're going to focus on, but we're going to have to really limit our scope. So perhaps we decide it's customer data, but actually you've got quite a lot of customer data. So perhaps we need to focus it on a subset of customer data, because you really need to take this opportunity to identify a very limited scope. I think the best way of thinking about doing data governance generally is data governance incrementally. And what we're doing with minimal data governance is just making sure that our first phase of data governance is very tightly defined. When we deliver that successfully, we're in a good place to roll it out further. So once you've got your scope defined, you're now in a position to actually design your data governance framework. Now, I teach whole training courses on this, so I can't tell you in a few minutes exactly what you need to do. But what I would say in my experience is that a good data governance framework has three things. It has a policy, because if you don't have a policy that mandates doing data governance, however minimally, people just won't do it. And probably now more than ever, people are facing really challenging times and frequently changing priorities. So we need to have a mandate that says we are going to govern our set of data, and you need to get that in a policy now. And this doesn't have to be a lengthy policy document. It can be really short. You just need to get something approved to get you started. You're going to need to have some processes. Which processes you have is going to very much depend on what you're focusing on delivering at this moment. But in my experience, if we don't have processes, people tend not to do things consistently. And if they don't follow processes consistently, then actually you can cause more problems instead of solving them with your data governance framework. And then the big thing we have to have is defined roles and responsibilities, because in my experience, most people will agree with you that absolutely you need data governance. But if you haven't agreed who's going to be responsible, everybody will assume that somebody else is going to do it. So that gives you the components. And the other thing I'd say about your framework is you've got to think about designing it for the benefits you need to deliver now, but also plan for the future. Think of this as just the start. You don't want to be designing a framework that needs to be ripped up and replaced in a year or 2 years' time. This is about designing something that can evolve and grow as your organization grows over the coming years, so you can extend your data governance framework. So I suppose it's the big question: can minimal data governance really be effective? Well, yes, I think it can, and because I think it's probably the way I've been increasingly doing data governance over recent years anyway. And all I'm encouraging you to do is to be even more pragmatic and focused than I usually am. But I think that if you do that, you'll be able to deliver something on an inadequate budget that can deliver some real value to your organization. But I think to be effective, you just need to keep three things in mind. Be very focused on your scope. You should never be doing data governance over everything, but right now, let's really have a narrow scope and focus on just one thing. Do it really properly. Remember, minimal data governance doesn't mean let's do it quick and dirty. Do it properly, just with a very limited scope. And do it in a way that's planning for the future. Do it to deliver some very focused benefits now, but in a way that the framework can be evolved and implemented across the organization in the future. something that you can scale. You don't want to have to revisit and do this from scratch again. So to wrap this up, it's not called minimal data governance, but on my website, there is a high-level free checklist that takes you through some of the steps that I think you should take when implementing data governance. And I think that if you take on board the points that I've covered today, you'll be able to go through the checklist and decide which bits you do and don't want to do. So please feel free to go and download that. So I hope this has been a helpful session. If you have any questions about anything I've covered right now, please feel free to get in contact using any of the methods you can see on that slide. And all that's left for me to do is to wish you good luck with your data governance initiative.